At a charity gala filled with champagne and small talk, a little girl tugged on the CEO's sleeve and asked, "Why do you have a picture of me in your wallet?" What she didn't know was that the man she was speaking to had spent the last 8 years mourning the baby he thought was gone forever. The room buzzed with soft music and polite conversation, the kind of carefully curated ambiance meant to encourage wealthy donors to open their hearts and their wallets. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of sparkling cider and mini desserts, while framed photos of smiling children lined the walls. It was the annual gala for the Willow House shelter, a place Adrian Vale had supported for years, more out of habit than sentiment. He came, he wrote a check, he left. That was the arrangement. Tonight was no different, until a small tug on his sleeve changed everything. Adrian turned, expecting to find a staff member or a volunteer needing his signature or his smile for a photo. But instead, he saw her. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, with tangled dark hair and large hazel eyes that seemed too serious for her age, stood beside him. Her dress was a size too big, her shoes scuffed, and she clutched something tightly in her hand. At first, he didn't understand what she was holding. Then he saw it clearly. A photograph, worn around the edges, creased from being folded too often. A photograph of a baby, wrapped in a soft blanket, lying on a hospital bed. His heart stuttered in his chest. He knew that picture. He had a copy of it tucked in his wallet, behind his driver's license and credit cards. He'd carried it for years, always there, always hidden. A reminder of what he'd lost, of what he could never forget. The girl looked up at him, her voice small but steady. "Why do you have a picture of me?" Adrian couldn't speak. For the first time in years, his mind, usually sharp and composed, went blank. The photo couldn't be real. Or rather, it couldn't be hers. The baby in the picture was his daughter. The child who had disappeared from a hospital room in the middle of the night. The child he'd buried in his heart after 1,000 dead-end leads and 1,000 sleepless nights. But here she was, standing in front of him, asking a question that shattered the walls he'd built around that part of his soul. He began, but the words caught in his throat. He reached for the photograph with a trembling hand, barely brushing the corner of it before the girl pulled it back, holding it close like something sacred. "Miss Dorsey said you were nice," she said softly. "She said you help kids like me, but she didn't tell me why you have this." He forced himself to breathe, to steady his voice. "Where did you get that photo?" "It was in my box," she said. "The one they gave me when I came to the shelter. They said it was all they had from before." Adrian's stomach twisted. He felt the room shrinking around him, the music fading into a dull hum. People were still chatting and laughing a few feet away, unaware that something enormous had just cracked open between a billionaire and a child in a borrowed dress. "What's your name?" he asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Elara," she said, and the name pierced him like a lightning bolt. He staggered back a step, the world tilting under his feet. Elara. The name he and his wife had chosen long before the birth, the name whispered in late-night conversations and scrawled in baby books that had never been filled. The name of the daughter he had lost. She was right there, standing in front of him, holding the past in her hands. And he didn't know whether to believe in fate or fall apart completely. Adrian stared at the girl, his mind reeling. The gala continued behind him, all smiles and polished speeches. But the world had narrowed to a quiet space between him and this small child holding a ghost in her hand. The photo in her fingers, wrinkled and smudged, was the same one he kept hidden in his wallet, the one he had stared at for years when sleep wouldn't come. It was a picture of a baby in a hospital bassinet, bundled in a soft yellow blanket, eyes barely open, a tiny birthmark visible just beneath the left ear. He had no idea who had given him that photo. It arrived one day in an unmarked envelope, slipped under the door of his office when he was still clawing his way to the top of the tech world. No note, no explanation, just the photo and the unmistakable pull of recognition. It had been 10 years since the night his life unraveled. He and his wife, Claire, had been in the hospital, for what should have been a routine birth. Elara came early but healthy. He remembered the warmth of her skin, the way she gripped his finger with a strength that shocked him. Then, sometime after midnight, she vanished. One nurse missing. No security footage. No answers. Just questions that turned into silence, and silence that hardened into pain. The police did what they could. Adrian did more. Hired private investigators, scoured adoption records, chased rumors across the country. Nothing led to Elara. The trail ended before it ever began. And after Claire died 2 years later, lost in grief and guilt, Adrian stopped looking. At least, that's what he told everyone. But he never let go of the photo. And now here it was again. Or rather, here she was. Elara, he said again, the name catching in his throat. The girl tilted her head, uncertain. Do you know me? Adrian's lips parted, but the truth tangled inside him. He wanted to say yes, wanted to fall to his knees and pull her into his arms, but nothing made sense. She was too old. Or maybe not. The timeline fit. But the idea of her surviving all these years, living in shelters, bounced from place to place while he built empires, that truth was too cruel to accept. I think I might, he said slowly, but I'm not sure yet. She didn't move closer. She just studied him, like she was trying to figure out if he was dangerous or kind. He recognized that look. He'd seen it on children before, the ones who knew better than to trust easily. She had the eyes of someone who had waited too long for someone to come back and had learned not to wait anymore. I didn't think the picture meant anything, she said quietly. But then I saw you. Miss Dorsey showed us your face in the flyer, said you were important. When I saw you in real life, you looked just like the man holding the baby in my photo. Adrian blinked. There's someone holding the baby? She nodded. Only half his face is showing, but it looks like you. Your nose is the same. He swallowed hard and reached into his jacket pocket. Carefully, he pulled out his wallet and removed the photograph he'd carried for nearly 6 years. He held it beside hers. The same image, the same child, the same timestamp in the corner. But hers had something his didn't, the edge of a hand, just barely visible, resting protectively beside the baby's head. And yes, he saw it now. It was his own hand. He looked at Elara again, this time seeing not just possibility, but the terrible, impossible truth. If this photo was real, if she was real, then someone had stolen her from him and left only this picture behind. Someone had kept her hidden all this time. And now, by pure chance or fate, she had found her way back. He didn't know how to say any of that, so he just said her name again, softer this time. Elara. And she didn't flinch. Mr. Vale, I'm so sorry, Miss Dorsey said, her heels clicking quickly across the polished floor as she approached. Her tone was soft, respectful, but edged with nerves. Elara, honey, let's give our guests some space. Elara looked up at her, confused. But I was just asking. I know, Miss Dorsey said gently, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. But we can talk about it later, okay? Elara's small fingers curled around the photo. She gave Adrian one last glance, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, then turned and walked with the director toward the back of the event hall. Adrian didn't move. His hand still gripped the photo from his wallet, his other hand clenched at his side. A storm had started in his chest, quiet but growing stronger with every breath. He turned to follow. Ms. Dorsey, he called, catching up with them near the double doors leading to the staff wing. I need a word, now. She hesitated but nodded. Of course. Elara, sweetie, wait for me in the reading room, all right? The girl disappeared through a side door, and Adrian followed Miss Dorsey into a quiet office filled with neatly stacked folders and faded posters about child safety. She gestured for him to sit, but he remained standing. Where did she get that photo? He asked without preamble. Miss Dorsey smoothed her skirt and took a careful breath. It was in her belongings when she arrived here. A small box, barely anything inside, some clothes, a toy elephant, that photograph. We catalog everything when a child is placed with us. And no one asks where it came from? She didn't know, Miss Dorsey said. At least that's what she told us. She came to us through a transfer from a private foster arrangement. One of those gray area placements. Uncle's friend, friend's sister, no formal adoption, no permanent guardian. Her records are thin. Adrian narrowed his eyes. Thin? She's been moved a lot, she admitted. We're trying to piece things together, but the paperwork is inconsistent. Some of it seems forged or edited. Her caseworker has been replaced twice in the last year. Honestly, I've had my suspicions, but without proof, all we can do is keep her safe. Who's listed as her guardian right now? No one, she said, folding her hands. Technically, she's a ward of the state until placement is confirmed. But no one stepped forward to claim her officially, which is part of what's so strange. Adrian paced the small office. The walls felt too close. She's 8 years old, no family, no real record. And you're telling me no one has looked into this? We have, Ms. Dorsey said a little defensively. But children slip through cracks all the time, Mr. Vale, especially when someone wants them to. He stopped pacing. What does that mean? She hesitated, then lowered her voice. There's something about her file that feels managed. Like someone was trying to make her invisible, but whoever it was didn't do a perfect job. It's like someone powerful wanted her kept off the radar, but not completely lost. Adrian's mind raced. His pulse thudded in his ears. He had resources, investigators, technology that could track almost anything. But somehow, this child, his child, had lived under the radar for nearly a decade. He turned toward the door. I want full access to her file, everything. I can't just hand that over, Ms. Dorsey said, rising to her feet. She's a minor under state care. There are laws. Then get me the person who can approve it, Adrian said. Because I'm not walking away from this. Miss Dorsey didn't argue. She only nodded, her face pale, her eyes filled with the weight of whatever truth she wasn't ready to say out loud. And Adrian knew one thing with absolute certainty. Elara wasn't just a girl in a photo anymore. She was a mystery. Someone had worked very hard to hide. And he intended to find out why. The city outside Adrian's penthouse window pulsed with light, but he didn't see it. He sat in his office, sleeves rolled up, staring at his computer screen, while a second monitor flickered with a live video call. On the other end sat Mark Leland, his head of security, a former federal agent with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. Adrian had given him a simple command earlier that evening. Find out everything you can about Elara. Mark had moved fast. She doesn't exist before age 4, Mark said, his voice low, steady. There's no birth certificate under her name, no medical history, no preschool records. Just a sudden appearance in the system, a transfer report from a private care home in South Carolina dated 4 years ago. Adrian frowned. And that home? Shut down 2 years ago, cited for poor documentation and unsafe conditions. The owner disappeared before they could serve a full audit. No forwarding address, no legal follow-up. On the screen, Mark tapped through documents and files. From there, Elara bounced through at least 3 different homes, each with gaps in paperwork. Some had no license, some were using expired permits. The only thing that's consistent is how inconsistent it all is. Adrian leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. So what are you saying? That someone planned this? I'm saying someone either went to great lengths to erase her early records or never let them exist in the first place. It's like she was dropped into the system mid-story. No origin, no official trail. Adrian stared at the wall behind the screen, where his late wife's portrait hung. Claire had loved puzzles, loved solving things, but nothing about this felt like a puzzle. It felt like a cover-up. What about DNA registries? Any matches? He asked. Mark hesitated. That's the other thing. I ran a scan through every public and private genetic database we have access to. No hits. Nothing under the name Elara, which means the sample wasn't entered by anyone. No hospital, no clinic, nothing. Until we take a direct sample and run it against yours, we won't get confirmation. Adrian opened his desk drawer and pulled out the photo again. The same one Elara had, but without the edges torn, without the corner that showed his hand. He stared at the baby's face, the soft cheeks, the birthmark under the left ear. "She's mine," he said quietly. "I know she is." Mark didn't argue. "If you're right, someone didn't just take her. They buried her in plain sight." Adrian closed the drawer slowly. "Keep digging. Quietly. I want to know who placed her in that first home. Who signed the transfer forms? Who profited?" Mark nodded once and disconnected. Alone now, Adrian stood and crossed the room. Staring out over the city he'd helped shape with code and vision. He'd conquered markets, built firewalls no one could breach, brought empires to their knees. But somehow, someone had stolen his child and vanished into the spaces between records. And now, years later, that same child had walked back into his life with a photo he wasn't supposed to have, a name she wasn't supposed to know, and eyes that matched his in every way that mattered. He turned off the lights, but didn't sleep. There was too much left unanswered, too much at stake. And Adrian Vale had never been one to let a mystery go unsolved. The hospital room had smelled like warm linen and new beginnings. Adrian remembered standing there, holding the tiny bundle in his arms, afraid to breathe too hard. Claire was asleep, exhausted, but smiling in her dreams, her hands still curled loosely on the side of the bed. Their daughter had come early, but not dangerously so. The doctors had said she was healthy, just small, and would need to spend a few nights in the neonatal unit for monitoring. Adrian had kissed Claire's forehead, promised to be right back, and followed the nurse down the hall with their baby. He remembered every second of that walk, the dim lights, the way the nurse hummed softly as she pushed the clear bassinet. The moment Adrian looked away to answer a call, just for a minute, just to tell his assistant he wouldn't be coming to the meeting that afternoon. And then she was gone. Not the nurse, the baby. He'd looked up, still holding the phone, and the hallway was empty. It didn't make sense. He called her name, asked a passing orderly if they'd seen a nurse with an infant. They hadn't. Panic hadn't arrived all at once. It crept in slowly, like a chill under the collar. He searched one hallway, then another. He checked the neonatal unit, asked every nurse at the desk. Each second stretched into terror until it snapped into screaming. The hospital went into lockdown. Police arrived. Security footage was pulled, reviewed, examined again. But the feed for that hallway had gone dark at the exact moment he'd stopped to take the call. Just static. Just enough to make it look like the footage had failed naturally. But it hadn't. The nurse was never identified. No one matched her description. No fingerprints were found. No witnesses remembered her face. It was like she never existed. Claire woke up to a world without her daughter and never truly returned from the shock. At first, she cried. Then, she went silent. Adrian tried everything: therapy, private investigators, grief counselors, long walks, soft music, new places. But none of it brought back the child they'd named Elara. None of it healed what had been taken. He changed after that. Not in a dramatic way, but slowly he worked longer hours, took on bigger risks, built firewalls and systems to protect everyone else, because he'd failed to protect the one who mattered most. His company grew, his name became known, but the foundation of everything was grief. Claire didn't want the empire. She wanted their baby. Her sadness turned bitter. They slept in separate rooms, talked less, fought more. And one rainy morning, after weeks of silence, she got in the car and drove away without saying goodbye. She died on a winding road just past the city limits, her car skidding off a curve slick with rain and memory. After her funeral, Adrian stood alone in the cemetery, holding the same photograph that now lived in his wallet. It had arrived weeks after the accident, slipped under the door of his office like a final blow or a strange kind of mercy. No message, no sender. Just the image of a baby, his baby, wrapped in a blanket, eyes barely open, birthmark visible. A photo taken after the disappearance, after the hospital. It was proof. Not of where Elara was, but that she had been alive after she vanished. It kept him going when everything else wanted to shut down. It sat in his wallet like a quiet promise, a thread that connected the past to the future. And now, all these years later, that same thread had come to life in the form of a girl with serious eyes and a question he'd never been ready to answer. She had survived. And someone had made sure he didn't know. Adrian hadn't stepped into a classroom in years, but there he was, standing in the rec room of Willow House, surrounded by tangled extension cords, aging laptops, and a group of curious kids who stared at him like he might be a magician or a math problem. He cleared his throat, adjusted his sleeves, and gave the easiest smile he could manage. He wasn't there to teach coding. Not really. The tech literacy program was something he'd quietly offered to sponsor under a new initiative, claiming it was part of his company's commitment to community outreach. But in truth, it was just a reason to see Elara again. He didn't know how else to do it. If he came too often just to talk to her, it might raise questions. But if he taught, if he volunteered, he could be close without drawing too much attention. Elara sat in the second row, arms crossed, face unreadable. She didn't look impressed. While the other kids leaned forward when he spoke about internet safety and password tricks, Elara stared at the floor, like she was listening to something far more important happening inside her head. When he passed by her chair to check on her screen, she didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but sharp. "You don't really need to teach this, do you?" Adrian paused. "Why do you say that?" "Because you already know everything you're saying," she said, her eyes meeting his. And people who already know things don't usually spend time explaining them unless they want something. It was such a simple sentence, but it cracked something in him. Because she was right. And because the way she said it, calm, precise, guarded, was exactly how he used to talk when he first began pitching ideas to rooms full of men who didn't want him to succeed. She had his voice, in a way, his manner. And her laugh, when another kid made a joke and she forgot to be guarded for just a moment, sounded so much like Claire's that it made the back of his throat burn. Each day, he came back, just for an hour, just long enough to answer questions about digital footprints and email safety, but really just long enough to watch the way she tilted her head when she thought hard about something. The way she never raised her hand but always knew the answer. The way she quietly helped the younger kids when no one else was looking. She wasn't the loudest in the room, or the most eager, but she was always paying attention, watching, measuring. After the third session, she stayed behind. Not for long, just long enough to pack her tablet slowly and then glance up at him. "You don't talk like other adults," she said. "Is that good or bad?" he asked. She shrugged. "I don't know yet, but it's different." He smiled, but didn't press. She was cautious, and he respected that. She had reason to be. And still, every day he showed up, she came back, sat in the same seat, watched him closely, like she was waiting to see if he'd crack. Adrian didn't need more evidence. He already knew. But knowing and proving were two different things. For now, he would wait, watch, and hope that one day she'd ask another question, not because she was searching for something, but because she decided to let him in. Until then, he would keep showing up. Because for the first time in years, showing up felt like the most important thing he could do. The afternoon sun spilled through the wide windows of the Willow House computer room, painting golden shapes on the scratched tables and worn carpet. Most of the kids had wandered off, chasing snacks or books or the promise of cartoons in the lounge. Adrian was packing up cables, pretending to focus on the mess, when Elara lingered by the door. She didn't speak right away, just hovered, watching him wind cords slowly into a loose coil. Her fingers tapped quietly against her tablet, and her eyes, as always, seemed to weigh the room before she let her voice slip into the air. "Can I ask you something?" she said, not looking at him directly. Adrian glanced up. "Of course." She hesitated, then looked around to make sure no one else was close. "There's a man," she said. "He comes to the shelter sometimes. Not every day, just sometimes." "What kind of man?" Adrian asked gently. Elara's voice lowered. "He doesn't talk to anyone, doesn't ask questions, just stands near the fence or across the street. Sometimes he sits in his car and pretends to read a newspaper, but it's always upside down." Adrian straightened, the cord forgotten in his hand. "Have you told anyone else?" "I told Miss Dorsey once," Elara said, shifting her weight. "She said maybe he was just a neighbor or someone waiting for someone else. But he's not. He watches me." Adrian's heart thudded hard. "Watches you?" She nodded. "He gives me bad feelings. Like when you know something's wrong but you can't say why." He studied her face, serious, still, too calm for a child, and he believed her instantly. "I'm glad you told me," he said. "Are you going to tell someone?" she asked, guarded again. "I'm going to handle it," Adrian promised. That night, long after the kids were asleep and the staff had gone home, Adrian returned to the shelter. He had keys now, thanks to his generous sponsorship and Ms. Dorsey's gratitude, and no one questioned his presence. Mark arrived shortly after with a small case, and a technician he trusted, like family. They worked in silence, placing 4 discrete cameras along the building's outer walls, angled to cover the front gate, the sidewalks, the parking lot, and the side alley. Adrian insisted on real-time remote access and facial recognition alerts. "This is a kid's shelter," Mark said quietly as they adjusted a camera above the entryway. "You think someone's targeting her?" "I don't know," Adrian answered, voice tight. "But she said she felt unsafe. That's enough for me." He didn't explain the twisting in his gut or the coldness that spread across his shoulders when Elara had described the man. He didn't explain how it reminded him of the hospital, the static in the security footage, the nurse no one could name. It felt the same, a shadow on the edge of something sacred. By midnight, the cameras were live. Adrian sat in his penthouse, watching the feeds, unable to rest. He saw cars pass, a woman walk her dog, a boy on a skateboard, but no man. Still, he kept watching. And when the system pinged just before dawn, alerting him to a tall figure leaning against the lamppost across the street from the shelter, face turned just slightly toward the building, he knew Elara had been telling the truth. Someone was watching her, and now Adrian was watching them. Adrian waited until the kids had gone outside for recess before he stepped quietly into the coat room. It wasn't his proudest moment, and he knew it. But pride had no place here, not when every instinct in his body told him the truth was close enough to touch, but still hidden behind a curtain he couldn't pull open fast enough. Elara's coat hung on the second hook from the left, faded pink with one pocket stitched shut and a tiny charm hanging from the zipper, a star, worn and chipped. He reached for it gently, careful not to disturb anything, his fingers moving with quiet urgency. Near the collar, tangled in the fleece lining, he found what he was looking for. A single hair, dark, curled at the tip. He sealed it inside the collection kit and tucked it into his pocket like it was made of glass. The lab he used wasn't ordinary. It was the kind of place where CEOs sent samples when they didn't want questions, where results were triple-checked and quietly delivered. Adrian gave them a name, his name, and said nothing else. He didn't need to. The results arrived 2 days later. He stared at the email for a long time before he opened it, sitting alone in his study. The only sound, the slow tick of the clock on the wall behind him. His hands didn't shake, but his chest did. Something inside him braced for impact. When the screen loaded, 3 words rose up to meet him. Probability of relationship, 99.99%. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't close. It was certainty. Elara was his daughter. Adrian closed his eyes and let the truth settle. He'd known it deep down from the moment she'd asked why he had her photo. But knowing it in his heart and seeing it in data were two very different things. One made him hope, the other made him ache. She was alive, his daughter, the child stolen from a hospital bassinet, the baby he had searched for in every shadow. She had been here all along, living in shelters, passed between strangers, carrying the weight of a past she couldn't remember. And someone had made that happen. He thought of the blank spots in her file, the forged paperwork, the man watching her from across the street. This hadn't been a simple case of a child getting lost in the system. It had been designed, covered up, maintained for years. But why? The question burned in his throat. Who had taken her? Who had kept her hidden? Who had decided she didn't belong with him? He looked at the photo still tucked behind the glass frame on his desk, the old one, the one with her wrapped in a blanket, his hand barely visible near her cheek. That picture hadn't appeared out of nowhere. Someone had sent it to him years after she was taken, which meant someone knew. Someone had wanted him to hurt but not lose hope. Someone had kept her close enough to survive, but far enough that she'd never remember him. Adrian stood and walked to the window, his reflection sharp against the city skyline. His daughter was alive, and now he wasn't just a man grieving what he lost. He was a father, and someone out there had stolen that from both of them. The shelter was quieter than usual when Adrian arrived that morning. No laughing children in the hallway, no music from the playroom, just the soft hum of lights and the faint shuffle of feet from somewhere down the corridor. Miss Dorsey stood behind the front desk, sorting papers with a distracted expression. When she looked up and saw him, her face tightened. "I need to speak with you," Adrian said, his tone sharper than usual. Miss Dorsey hesitated, then gestured toward her office. Once inside, she closed the door behind them and folded her hands on the desk. "This is about Elara," Adrian said. "I need the truth. All of it." She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't play dumb or stall. She just let out a slow breath and nodded. "I thought you might come," she said. "I just didn't think it would be this soon." Adrian sat down, his jaw clenched. "You knew something was wrong." Miss Dorsey didn't argue. Not at first. When she arrived, the file looked thin, but that's not unusual. We get a lot of incomplete histories. But then I noticed things. The way her paperwork had been rewritten. The names that didn't match. And the lack of any early medical records. It was like her life started at 4. Because someone made it start at 4, Adrian said. Someone erased everything before that. She nodded. "I reached out to a contact I have at Child Protective Services, asked discreet questions. He warned me off, told me Elara's case was protected, said it came from higher up." "What does that even mean?" Adrian snapped. "Protected by who?" "I don't know," she said, her voice low. "But someone powerful has been keeping tabs on her. I've seen the same car parked across the street more than once. The same man walking by but never coming in. I thought he might be her father at first. But then I realized he never looked at the other kids. Only her." Adrian's pulse pounded. "Why didn't you do something?" Miss Dorsey looked down at her hands. "Because I was afraid. This isn't just about one girl. I've seen what happens to shelters that get in the way. Our funding can disappear overnight. We've had budget cuts, inspection threats, strange delays with licenses. And then last year, someone donated a large amount anonymously with a note attached for Elara's comfort. No signature, no contact information, just cash." Adrian sat back slowly. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they painted was darker than he expected. Someone had orchestrated this. Not out of kindness, not out of love, but out of control. Elara hadn't been lost. She'd been kept, watched, managed. "You should have come to me," he said. "I was trying to protect her," she said quietly. "And sometimes when you're running a place like this, you make compromises. You tell yourself it's for the greater good. But I knew, deep down, something was wrong." Adrian stood. His voice was calm now, but cold. "It ends today. No more silence. No more hiding. I'm going to find out who did this." Miss Dorsey looked up at him, eyes full of regret. Then you'll need to go deeper than I ever could, because whoever's behind this, they don't leave fingerprints. Adrian didn't respond. He didn't need to. He was done being quiet. Adrian sat in his car outside the Blaine estate, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. The driveway stretched wide in front of him, flanked by trimmed hedges and an iron gate that always reminded him of how carefully Harold Blaine guarded his world. Years ago, they used to have drinks on that terrace, talk about business, like it was a game they were both winning. Harold had been more than a backer. He'd been one of the first people to believe in Adrian's company when it was just sketches and sleepless nights. But belief could twist, especially when loss entered the picture. Adrian hadn't thought about Harold's daughter in a long time. Emma, blonde, quiet, always clinging to her mother's skirt. She couldn't have been more than 6 when the custody battle began, and everything after that got messy. Allegations, investigations, restraining orders. Adrian had kept his distance, told himself it wasn't his place. But now, with Elara's story unfolding, the past no longer felt like something he could leave buried. Harold had access. That much was clear. Back then, they shared more than business, they shared their lives. Their homes were open, their families familiar. Harold had been at the hospital the day Elara was born. He had walked those halls, brought flowers, smiled for photos, and he had disappeared just days after the kidnapping, claiming an emergency board meeting across the country. Adrian hadn't questioned it at the time. Everything had been chaos. He barely remembered who came and went during those first few days. But now, he saw the timeline differently. The silence, the distance, the sudden coldness after Claire's death, none of it seemed innocent anymore. Inside his office, Adrian combed through financial records, cross-checking dates and transactions. A quiet trail began to form. Donations made in cash, unregistered trusts, a series of shell companies, all tied back to one holding group, Blaine Consulting. Mark joined him at midnight, holding a thin manila folder. His expression was grim. "You were right," he said, dropping the folder on the desk. "Harold paid the shelter last year, indirectly, through a company that doesn't technically exist, but the routing numbers match. And get this, he also donated to that shut-down group home where Elara first showed up." Adrian's jaw clenched, so he funded the places that kept her hidden. "Looks that way," Mark said. "And there's more. Back when you and Claire were going through the worst of it, Harold bought a property under another name. Remote, private, big enough for a family." I pulled up aerial photos. There's a swing set in the yard. Adrian stared at the images. The photos were grainy, but they didn't need to be clear. The timeline, the locations, the transactions, everything pointed in the same direction. Harold had motive. He'd lost his own daughter. He knew that pain. And somehow, somewhere along the way, it had broken him in a way that twisted into something else. He hadn't taken Elara to hurt Adrian. He'd taken her to fill the hole left in his own life. But no matter the reason, it didn't matter now. Adrian stood slowly, his voice low. "He took my daughter. He made her disappear. And now, I'm going to make sure he never does it again." The cabin looked like something from a magazine, modern, sharp-edged, tucked neatly into a forest, clearing far from the city. Glass walls, steel accents, and just enough minimalism to make it seem harmless. Harold used it for quiet strategy weekends, where he brought executives out for brainstorming, far from distractions. Adrian had been here once, years ago, before everything fractured. Now he stood at the edge of the gravel path, dressed in casual layers, carrying nothing but a leather laptop bag and a lie. Harold wasn't here. He was at a conference in Berlin, a detail Adrian confirmed before calling the housekeeper, claiming he needed access to finish a pitch deck for an upcoming investor meeting. The housekeeper, polite and trusting, left him a key under the planter, just like old times. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. Adrian moved quietly, not because he feared being caught, but because some part of him already felt like he was trespassing on something heavier than just property. Every corner of the house was pristine, books arranged alphabetically, surfaces wiped spotless, drawers empty except for neatly placed office supplies. Except one. In the study, behind a white oak desk, was a cabinet with 4 drawers. 3 opened easily. The 4th didn't. No label, no key. Just a small silver lock, worn at the edges like it had been used often. Adrian reached into his bag and pulled out a slim black pouch. Mark had slipped it to him the night before, saying, "If you find something locked, open it. No hesitation." It took less than 30 seconds for the pick to turn. The drawer slid open with a soft click. Inside was a stack of folders, a box of photos, a flash drive in a velvet case. Adrian pulled everything out slowly, spreading it across the desk like pieces of a broken clock. Each one ticked louder than the last. Photos of Elara. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens. Her first steps, a birthday party with no other children, a school play where she stood at the edge of the stage. Some were printed, some labeled with dates, many marked with Harold's handwriting. Elara, age 5. Elara, first piano lesson. Elara, Tuesday morning walk. Beneath the photos were reports from nannies, some formal, some scrawled in rushed handwriting. Notes about her health, her progress, her quietness. Pages that painted a picture of a girl being raised in secret, managed like a project, not loved like a child. Then came the documents. A forged birth certificate, listing Harold Blaine as the father. A fabricated adoption record from a foreign agency Adrian had never heard of. A vaccination card stamped with a clinic that had been shut down 5 years ago. Each page was more disturbing than the last. Layers of lies constructed to build a version of reality where Elara belonged to Harold, where Adrian had never existed. He stared at the papers, hands clenched at his sides. It wasn't just that Harold had taken her. He had tried to erase Adrian completely, replacing him with signatures and false stamps and quiet, stolen years. Adrian stood there for a long time, his reflection caught in the glass of a framed photo. Harold holding Elara's hand, smiling like a proud father. But it wasn't real. None of it was real. Except her. Elara had survived all of it, lived through the lies, and somehow kept her quiet fire. Adrian gathered the files and placed them carefully into his bag. The lock clicked shut behind him. This time, he wasn't leaving empty-handed. The boardroom at Valetech was glass and steel and silence. 11 people sat around the polished table, flipping through reports they wouldn't remember, murmuring over quarterly projections that no longer mattered. Adrian sat at the head, still and sharp in a dark suit. The only man in the room who wasn't pretending everything was fine. Harold entered late, as usual. His voice carried too loud when he greeted the others, his laugh forced, too easy. He sat across from Adrian, smoothing his tie, flipping through the agenda as if they were going to discuss cloud expansion and cybersecurity protocols, as if everything wasn't about to collapse. Adrian didn't wait. "Before we begin," he said, his voice calm but cutting, "I'd like to address something not on the agenda." The room stilled. Chairs stopped shifting, eyes lifted. Harold smiled faintly, like he saw the play coming but didn't believe it would land. "Of course, Adrian. The floor's yours." Adrian reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. He placed it on the table without opening it. "That folder contains documentation of a property purchased under a fake name," he said. "Inside are photographs of a child, my child, growing up in isolation, reports from hired nannies, and forged legal records declaring you as her father." Gasps flickered around the table, but no one moved. Harold's smile didn't fade. "You've been digging," he said softly. "I wondered when you'd start." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You took my daughter." "I saved her," Harold snapped, voice low but venomous. "You don't get to rewrite the past. You left Claire to drown in her grief. You buried yourself in code and companies. You let your pain make you cold. That girl would have been lost in the wreckage of your guilt." Adrian rose from his chair, slow and deliberate. "You decided I didn't deserve her. So you stole her, lied to her, hid her. I gave her a life, Harold hissed. She had everything. Tutors, gardens, safety. I raised her better than you ever could have. She didn't need gardens, Adrian said, voice shaking. She needed her father. She needed her mother. She needed the truth. She needed protection, Harold said. And I was the only one willing to give it. Adrian leaned forward, his hands on the table. You didn't do it for her. You did it because you lost your own daughter, and you couldn't stand the emptiness. So you took mine and pretended she was yours. Harold didn't deny it. His face was tight now, brittle at the edges. She doesn't even remember you. She will, Adrian said, his voice steady. And when she does, she'll know exactly who kept us apart. The boardroom was silent again, but it was no longer passive. The weight in the air had shifted. Directors whispered to each other. Legal counsel scribbled notes. No one was on Harold's side now, not with that folder sitting between them like a loaded weapon. Adrian gathered the papers slowly. You're done here, Harold. Your shares, your seat, your access. You're out. Harold stood, but the confidence had drained from him. You think this is justice? No, Adrian said. This is just the beginning. And for the first time in years, the burn in his chest felt like something else, something close to peace. The message came late, tucked into an encrypted email routed through an overseas server. Adrian opened it alone, seated at his desk in the dark, the city lights flickering like stars behind the glass. He didn't need to guess who sent it. He didn't need a signature. Inside was a short note, a threat disguised as a negotiation. If Adrian moved forward with pressing charges or public accusations, Harold would release documents, doctored but dangerous, that painted Adrian as a man who had covered up data breaches, inflated numbers for investors, and used insider information to protect his stock options. None of it was true, but in the world of billion-dollar tech companies, perception could be more damaging than proof. Attached were the files, edited emails, screenshots that could fool someone who wanted to believe the worst. Harold had been planning this for a long time. Adrian sat still, jaw clenched, fingers tight around the edge of his desk. For years he had played by the rules, built something from the ground up with his name on every line. He had nothing to hide, but Harold knew how to twist shadows into something ugly. And in a world addicted to scandal, the damage wouldn't wait for the truth to catch up. If this went public, the headlines would drown everything else. Adrian Vale, the tech visionary, exposed, accused of fraud, investigated. Lawsuits would pile up. Stocks would drop. Clients would panic. And in the middle of it all, Elara would be watching. The same girl who had already lost too much, already learned to flinch at kindness, would have to sit through whispers and news anchors tearing apart the man who claimed to be her father. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, letting the silence stretch until it felt like a weight on his chest. Mark's voice cut through it the next morning. We can beat this. If you want to take him down, we will. You've got real proof. He's got fabricated noise. Adrian shook his head slowly. Truth takes time. Lies don't. Mark nodded. Quiet. He knew. He'd seen good men fall faster than they could stand back up. Adrian didn't answer right away. He stood at the window, watching the fog roll across the city. In the reflection, he saw more than himself. He saw Elara curled up in the corner of the reading room at the shelter, drawing quietly. He saw the way she flinched when someone knocked too loudly. The way she looked at him like she wanted to believe in something, but couldn't quite allow herself to. This wasn't just about revenge or justice anymore. It was about her. About whether she'd have to watch another man fall apart in front of her. About whether she'd lose another safe place just as she started to believe in it. Adrian turned back to Mark, his voice quiet but certain. We don't play defense, he said. We gather everything. Every lie Harold's told. Every person he's manipulated. We build a wall of truth so solid he can't even scratch it. Mark gave a slow nod. And the blackmail? Adrian looked at the email again, then deleted it. Let him try. I'll risk my reputation before I let him rewrite her life again. Because some things were worth more than a company. Some things were worth everything. It started with a misunderstanding, just a few words overheard through a cracked office door. But for a child like Elara, words didn't have to be complete to hurt. She had learned long ago that people's intentions were often buried under the things they said when they thought no one was listening. Adrian had come to the shelter that afternoon to speak with Ms. Dorsey in private. He was explaining the fallout, trying to plan the next step in protecting Elara legally. His voice had been tight, careful, but not quiet enough. I can make a deal with the board, he'd said. If I walk away from the press, from the legal fight, we keep the narrative clean. The company survives, and I still get custody. I can't lose both. He hadn't meant it like that. Not like a trade. Not like a bargain where she was, the thing being exchanged. But Elara had paused in the hallway, her notebook clutched to her chest, and those words had pierced her like a pin through soft cloth. Still get custody. Walk away from the fight. Like she was a problem he needed to solve. Like she was a piece on the table. By the time Adrian realized she was gone, it was already dusk. Ms. Dorsey found her room empty, the window cracked open. Her coat and backpack were missing. So was the small stuffed elephant she kept hidden under the bed. Adrian's heart dropped into his stomach. He didn't wait for protocol or permission. He called Mark, called his security team, pulled footage from the shelter's exterior cameras. Elara had slipped through the side gate 20 minutes earlier, her head down, her steps quick. The city swallowed her, just like it had swallowed her past. The streets were getting colder as night fell. Adrian drove in circles, scanning sidewalks, parks, bus stops. Every time he passed a child bundled in a too big coat, his heart lurched. He called her name through rolled down windows. He checked every place she'd mentioned in their quiet conversations. Bookstores, the corner cafe with the broken chalkboard, the bench near the old playground where she liked to sit and watch the world go by. Nothing. His chest felt hollow with panic, his hands shaking on the wheel. She had run because she thought he was going to give her away. And the worst part was, he hadn't even noticed she was there when he said it. He hadn't realized she was close enough to hear the one thing she needed to be protected from. By midnight, Adrian was at the police station, filing a missing child report. The officer tried to be kind, but Adrian could see the doubts in his eyes. A runaway from a shelter didn't spark the same urgency as a child taken from a gated home. But Elara wasn't just another name on a clipboard. She was his, and he would turn the entire city upside down before he let her disappear again. The sky was starting to pale by the time Adrian reached the bridge. His headlights cut through the early morning fog, casting long streaks of light on the damp pavement. The city behind him was beginning to stir. Delivery trucks rumbled along quiet streets, shop windows blinked to life, and the first wave of morning joggers began to appear like ghosts in the mist. But on this stretch of bridge, it was still and quiet, suspended between night and day, past and future. He saw her before she saw him. Elara sat on the low ledge, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them, her backpack beside her like a small shield. Her hair clung to her face, damp from the fog, and her eyes were red and swollen, though she wasn't crying anymore. She just stared at the water below, the way people do when they're trying to make sense of a world that doesn't add up. Adrian's heart cracked at the sight. This bridge, this exact spot, was where he had stood the night Claire died. He'd leaned over the rail, clutching the photo of their daughter, whispering apologies into the wind, believing for a long, terrible second that he'd failed too deeply to keep going. Claire had driven away from here hours before the crash. This place had swallowed the last of his hope back then. And now, Elara was here. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, but when the gravel under his shoes crunched, she turned. Her eyes locked with his, and for a moment she didn't move. "I wasn't going to jump," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. "I just needed to think." "I know," Adrian said gently. "I believe you." She turned back toward the water. "You were going to give me away, like a trade." "No," Adrian said, and the word came out rough. "That's not what I meant, not even close." "I heard you," she whispered. "You said if you let it go, you'd still get custody. like I was something to win, not someone. Adrian stepped closer, heart pounding. I said that badly. I was trying to figure out how to protect you, how to keep everything from falling apart. But Elara, I never thought of you like a thing to be claimed. I was scared. And I said the wrong words. I'm so sorry. She wiped at her face with a sleeve of her coat. People always say I'm brave, but I'm not. I just don't know what else to be. I always have to move before someone decides I don't fit. You fit with me, Adrian said, the words breaking through the chill. You always have, from the moment I saw you, even when I didn't understand it yet. She looked at him then, really looked, her face small and tired and older than it should have been. You're not going to send me away? Never, Adrian said. You're not a deal. You're not a project. You're my daughter, and I'm never letting you go again. Her shoulders shook, not from cold, but from the weight of finally hearing what she had never been told before. Adrian crossed the space between them and wrapped his arms around her. She didn't resist. She let herself be held. And for the first time in a very long time, the bridge stopped feeling like an ending. It felt like a beginning. The press conference was held in the main lobby of ValeTech headquarters, beneath a vaulted ceiling of glass and steel, where natural light poured in like truth, refusing to be hidden. Dozens of reporters filled the space, cameras blinking like nervous eyes, microphones pointed forward, hungry for answers. Adrian stood at the podium, not flanked by lawyers or advisors, but alone, dressed simply without the polished armor of a corporate giant. He took a breath. There was no script, no teleprompter, just the truth he had carried for too long. Good morning, he began, his voice steady but unguarded. My name is Adrian Vale. I'm the founder and CEO of this company. But today, I'm not here as a businessman. I'm here as a father. The murmur started immediately, soft, curious, but he didn't stop. 8 years ago, my daughter was taken from me, stolen. Her name is Elara. I searched for her, I grieved her, and I thought I lost her forever. But a few months ago, something changed. A picture, a question, a brave little girl standing in front of me, with eyes I couldn't forget. He looked out at the crowd, his hands resting calmly on the edges of the podium. What I discovered after that moment led me down a path I never could have imagined. That path led to Harold Blaine, a former investor and someone I once trusted, like family. Harold created a false identity, forged documents, paid to keep Elara off the grid, and raised her in secret as if she were his own. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few reporters leaned in. Cameras zoomed closer. The name alone was enough to light a fire, but Adrian didn't raise his voice. He spoke clearly, with the weight of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. I have evidence, he continued. Photographs, reports, financial trails. It's been shared with law enforcement and federal investigators. Harold Blaine will answer for what he's done. But I'm not here to talk about him. I'm here to talk about Elara. He paused, letting her name settle in the room. She is my daughter, and I am adopting her, legally, publicly, permanently. Whatever damage this causes to my image, my company, or my reputation is worth it. Because the truth is more important than control, and love is more important than fear. Silence followed. Then softly, a few claps. It spread slowly, then caught. By the time Adrian stepped back from the microphone, the sound filled the lobby, not the wild applause of a headline-seeking crowd, but something warmer. Respect. Understanding. Backstage, Mark gave a small nod, so did Miss Dorsey. But the surprise came later, when Adrian returned to his office and found his leadership team waiting, not to question him, not to reprimand, but to thank him. We built this place on trust, his COO said. You just showed us what that actually looks like. By the end of the day, messages poured in from employees, clients, and partners, support, not skepticism. They didn't turn away. They stood with him. Adrian looked at the framed photo on his desk, the old one that had once been his only connection to Elara. Soon, there would be a new one where they stood side by side, in the open, no longer afraid of what anyone might say, because this wasn't about saving face. It was about claiming family. The courtroom was small and quiet, with wooden benches polished smooth by time and nerves. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting pale rectangles across the floor. It was a space meant for truth, but everyone in the room carried pieces of the past that refused to sit still. Adrian sat at the front with Elara beside him, her small hand wrapped around his. She wore a navy dress and the same pair of scuffed shoes she refused to let go of. Adrian had offered new ones, but she had quietly shaken her head. "I want to wear what I came in," she had said. "So I remember." Across the aisle, Harold sat with his lawyer, face tight and pale. He looked like a man trying not to unravel, but the threads were already fraying. His jaw twitched every time Elara looked in his direction, but she didn't look often. Her gaze stayed forward, her hand never leaving Adrian's. The judge, a woman with kind eyes and a firm voice, called the room to order and began the hearing. The early parts passed in a blur. Documentation, confirmation of DNA results, psychological evaluations. Ms. Dorsey gave testimony on Elara's time at the shelter, her strengths, her silence, her slow return to trust. Then came the final statements. Adrian stood first, his voice clear but thick with emotion. He told the court what it meant to find his daughter again after believing she was gone forever. He didn't offer flowery speeches. He just spoke plainly, the way Elara liked. He promised to protect her, to listen, to never let her carry the weight of uncertainty alone again. Then Harold rose, and the room shifted. He didn't deny what he'd done. Instead, he tried to explain it. He talked about grief, about his own lost daughter, about watching Adrian fall into work and disappear after Claire's death. He said he saw a child about to be forgotten and made a choice. "I gave her a life," he said, voice rising, "one she never would have had under a man who only cared about code and boardrooms." Adrian didn't flinch. He didn't need to respond, because Elara did. She stood, voice small but steady. "You gave me a house," she said, "but he gave me a name." The silence after that was heavy. The judge was just about to speak when a marshal stepped forward. He whispered something to her, and she nodded sharply. "Mr. Blaine," she said, voice firm, "you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, falsifying legal documents, and the unlawful custody of a minor. Please stand." The courtroom erupted into whispers, as Harold's lawyer tried to intervene, but it was too late. The marshal placed handcuffs on Harold's wrists and led him away. He didn't look back. Elara did. She didn't smile, but something in her shoulders relaxed. Something long held finally let go. The judge cleared her throat and turned to Adrian and Elara. "Do you wish to proceed with the adoption?" Adrian looked down at the girl beside him. She nodded once, squeezing his hand. "Yes," he said, "we do." The judge signed the paper, her voice soft now. "From this day forward, your legal name shall be Elara Vale." Elara blinked fast, but the tears didn't fall. Her eyes didn't shine with fear or confusion anymore. They shone with hope, because this time, the name wasn't just something she was given. It was something she chose. The office felt different now, not because the furniture had changed or the skyline view had shifted, but because the air itself was warmer, lighter. For years, it had been a place of sharp decisions and silent grief, a quiet fortress where Adrian had buried himself in work to forget everything else. But now, on the shelf beside his desk, something new rested among the glass awards and leather-bound portfolios. 2 framed photographs stood side by side. One was old, the edges slightly curled, the colors faded from being kept in his wallet for too long. A baby wrapped in a yellow blanket, her tiny features soft with sleep, a faint birthmark just under her left ear. He had stared at that photo through sleepless nights, through meetings, through years that never gave him answers. It had been his only proof that she had ever been real. The second photo was new. Elara on his shoulders, arms outstretched like wings, her face tilted to the sky, laughing so hard her eyes were nearly closed. They were at the beach, the breeze wild in her hair, their shadows long and tangled in the sand. Adrian was smiling in that picture too. Not the practiced, polite smile he wore in interviews, but something deeper, unburdened. Elara stood beside the desk now, tracing her fingers along the edge of the old photo. "You still keep this one?" she asked softly. He looked up from the report he was pretending to read. "Of course." She studied the baby in the frame, then looked at the new photo beside it. "It's different seeing it now. I used to wonder where I came from. If someone ever looked for me, if I was just forgotten." Adrian set the papers down. "You were never forgotten, Elara. You were stolen, but never forgotten." She was quiet for a moment, then reached for the old photo. "Do you think I should tear it up? You don't need to carry it anymore." He smiled gently and took her hand, curling her fingers back around the frame. "No," he said, "because now I carry you." Her eyes lifted to meet his, and he saw it there. The light that had taken weeks to return. The one not dulled by doubt or fear. The one that said she believed him. She didn't ask any more questions. Instead, she climbed into the armchair across from him, curling her legs underneath her like she owned the space, like she belonged there. And she did. A knock came at the door, and Mark peeked in. "Your 3 o'clock was just rescheduled. Want me to push the team call too?" Adrian looked at Elara, who was already opening her sketchbook. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Push everything." Mark smiled and nodded, closing the door. Adrian turned back to the shelf, to the pictures that told two sides of the same story, one of loss and one of finding. And in the quiet hum of the office, with Elara's pencil scratching softly on paper, he realized something he hadn't dared believe before. The past no longer owned him, and the future, at last, had a name. If this story moved you, like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want more powerful stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.